Kashmir, so much has happened. You take the national security issues, you take whatever is happening politically over there with the separatist leaders over there.
You see, it's not been a happy situation. There has been violence, and violence reinforces violence. State violence is no answer to terrorism. It will only create more terrorists. Think about the kind of sacrifices the Indian army people have made. The people from villages, they get martyred for no fault of theirs. They didn't create the Kashmir issue. They don't have a solution for it. We are just sacrificing lives. This violence has to stop.
Where were the seeds sown for this issue? Because this was not just India or Pakistan problem. This was not just Hindu or Muslim problem. This was sort of a colonial game.
Now, after the first war of independence, Hindus and Muslims were trying to get united to throw the British. And the British realized this. And if you see the exchange of telegrams between the Viceroy and the Secretary of State, the British policy seemed to be that we must break this unity. We need to communalize India. As of date, you have 45% of the territory with India. You have about 35% of the territory with Pakistan, and you have about 20% of the territory with China. The CPEC starts from Gilgit-Baltistan, Indian territory. One needs to put facts in the public domain in such a way to show to the people that you all are one people. With this situation, Pakistan being in control of that territory, Nehru realized that plebiscite is never going to happen. In fact, there's a secret telegram which he sent to Sheikh Abdullah in 1952, where he says that 4 years ago I had realized that plebiscite was not going to happen. War is not an option. Perhaps the best way to do is let them keep what they have, we keep what we have.
In the book, you have mentioned that Article 370 is neither the genesis of the Kashmir issue or is the solution located in it. What is this exactly? Namaste Jai Hind. My name is Jayesh Gangan and this is The J Report, a podcast for all your intellectual curiosities. On tonight's podcast, my guest is Dr. Aman Hingorani, a senior advocate and mediator at Supreme Court of India. In this podcast, we talk about Jammu and Kashmir's history. We talk about the legal lens of Jammu and Kashmir. We look at Jammu and Kashmir from a very legal and intellectual point of view. We talk about Dr. Aman Hingorani's book, Unraveling the Kashmir Knot. Dr. Aman Hingorani explains in this podcast how Pakistan and China have influenced everything that is happening inside Jammu and Kashmir. This is an intellectually stimulating podcast. So let's begin in 3, 2, 1. Mr. Aman Hingorani ji, welcome on the podcast.
Thank you.
Today we are here to speak about Kashmir and your book as well. Now, there are a lot of perspectives about Kashmir which you have addressed in your book as well, and you have given a way forward and how we can resolve the issue. But to understand how we can resolve the issue, there's a huge history behind that. And we need to first understand that. How did Kashmir actually become this international issue? And where were the seeds sown for this issue? Because when I read the book, I got to know this was not just India or Pakistan problem. This was not just Hindu or Muslim problem. This was much more than that. This was sort of a colonial game. So where does this start?
Well, you see, whenever we talk about the Indian subcontinent and we talk about partition history, there's always been a Indian narrative, there's been a Pakistan narrative. When I started researching on the Kashmir issue way back in 1995, I went into the British narrative as to what had happened on the subcontinent. Now, whether accurate or otherwise, there are documents which indicate what was the policies that led to the partition in 1947. My research over since 1995 onwards has led me to believe that the Kashmir issue was one has to see the Kashmir issue in context of the partition politics. The documents indicate that after the British had become a territorial power, and we can fast forward it right up till the first war of independence, or the mutiny as the British called it. That ended the role of the East India Company on the subcontinent. And then we had you had the British Crown that stepped in. So you had a kind of a constitutional relationship of a viceroy on the subcontinent and a secretary of state in London, typically a minister in the cabinet. And these individuals governed the subcontinent. It was a unitary form of a government. So you had certain constitutional legal developments, certain developments which happened in 1858. You had the first Government of India Act, which set this up. And the British said, well, we will now take a different policy of annexation. We want to annex more territory. That time there were about 560 odd princely states. It will be sufficient if they owe their allegiance to the British Crown. Jammu and Kashmir was one of those princely states.
Mhm.
So at that point of time, there was two kind of territories under British rule. One was the provinces ruled
Right.
directly, so Punjab, Bengal, etc. And the other were these princely states. So that was the kind of polity that was there. Now, after the first war of independence, um, my research shows that Hindus and Muslims were trying to get united to throw the British. And the British realized this. So you had the Indian National Congress, which was set up, more of a secular body, to spearhead the freedom movement. And if you see the exchange of telegrams between the Viceroy and the Secretary of State, the British policy seemed to be that we must break this unity. There are Hindu Muslim differences, which have been there prior to when the British came, but we need to sharpen them. We need to communalize India. And that was actually a policy which is spelled out in black and white in these documents.
Mm.
Things came to a head when the Prince of Wales had visited India and then told the Secretary of State that the Congress is becoming a power, whether we like it or not. And then you had the Muslim Congress, which is called the Muslim League, which
Right.
was created. Where
But then before you continue, there's something which I found very interesting in the book which you have quoted. This is from Syed Ahmad Khan. And he says, I heartily wish to serve my country and my nation faithfully. In the word nation, I include both Hindus and Mohammedans because that is the only meaning I can attach to it. I call both those races which inhabit India by one word, that is Hindu, meaning to say that they are inhabitants of Hindustan. From here, we go to Muslim League and the Direct Action Day.
you see, which is the reason why most of the founders of Pakistan, and we'll talk about how Pakistan is a creation of the British, actually reached out to the Hindus for that Hindu-Muslim unity.
Hmm.
So Syed Ahmad Khan, for instance, in Gurdaspur has said that Hindustan is it's a Hindu is a territorial connotation. Whoever stays in Hindustan is Hindu, regardless of whether you practice Islam or Christianity or Hinduism. So whoever stays in Hindustan is Hindu, and we are one nation. There's no question of different nations, but we are just one nation staying here. The book, of course, documents how he, then Aga Khan, then later on of even Iqbal, for instance, all these were eventually um, induced, I would say, to talk about then along the two nation theory, which Gandhi has said is an untruth, because most of those who are practicing Islam in India anyway converts, but religion has never been the basis of or the criteria of nationhood. I mean, you can have, I mean, it's common sense. I mean, if you're in, for example, in America and you have a Christian or you have a Muslim, so they're American Christians, American Muslims, but they're still American. So religion is not a test for nationhood. So Gandhi had trashed it right up front, saying that this is an untruth. And it's a new test which is sought to be introduced. But from the time when the Hindu Muslims were trying to put a united front, it was the British policy to create a wedge. In fact, I've quoted from one telegram of 1925 sent by the Viceroy to the Secretary of State, where he says that whatever bridge Gandhi is trying to make between Hindu and Muslims, we have succeeded in destroying it. So there was a deliberate effort to communalize India, which is different from religious persecution. We have had instances in India's history. India is a very ancient civilization. There have been instances of persecution under one community or otherwise, but there was never communalization of a polity. That was deliberate British politics. That if we cannot, we need to sharpen those differences to such an extent that both Hindu and Muslim communities need us to remain on the subcontinent to be the composers.
Hmm.
Now, that took a different connotation with the outbreak of the Second World War, when the Indian National Congress did not support the war effort because the British declared India at war. And Nehru at that point of time said, why should we be at war? We don't support Hitler, but why should we come to the rescue of a tottering imperialist power also? So many scholars, many writers have written about that it was at that stage that, I mean, of course, the divide and rule policy came very naturally to the British, but it was at that stage that the seeds were sown for partition of India.
Because the British had realized that if they support maybe Nehru or India, they won't get what they really wanted in terms of military cooperation.
You see, at that point of time, what was going on was many authors have called it the Great Game between the British and Soviet Russia, and the idea was to prevent Russian influence coming southwards towards the Middle East. So even the Ottoman Empire was actually at that point of time a kind of a buffer area. And if you see the map, you can see right from Turkey to China, there's Islamic crescent. So the northwestern part of the Indian subcontinent, that was Northwest Frontier Province, Gilgit-Baltistan, which is part of Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir state, they form part of this Islamic crescent. Now, the British realized that once they would have to transfer power to Indian hands, and India would not be able, led by the Indian National Congress, would not serve their strategic or defense interests on the subcontinent. So the British had decided that we need to create a friendly state, friendly to the British, which would serve as their defense outpost on the subcontinent. And that outpost, that defense area, coincides with what is now Pakistan. So the British basically wanted the Northwest Frontier Province because that completed the Islamic crescent. Northwest Frontier Province is a hilly area. It's not viable as a state. And so you needed the plains of Punjab. And so Punjab had to be partitioned. And if we talk about East Punjab, West Punjab, the idea was that we take the Muslim dominated area and merge that with the Northwest Frontier Province to make that viable. The Indian National Congress tried to make the partition scheme unattractive by telling the British they thought that the British would never partition Punjab. It was being governed by a unionist party, which was a secular party. And so they said, well, if you want to partition Punjab by your two-nation theory, you would need to also partition Bengal. And the British said, we'll do that also. So Bengal's partition was incidental to the partition of Punjab.
But then Mountbatten never supported that partition, right? Of
No,
East Bengal, because he knew this would never work.
Mountbatten has gone on record to say that it was a ridiculous idea to have two East Pakistan, West Pakistan separated. It would never work. But he said that Pakistan, what is now Pakistan, is a viable state. It is his creation. He's gone on record to say that. But much before Mountbatten, I've documented from telegrams and cables from 1940, where the viceroy is telling the Secretary of State that I've asked Rafullah Khan to drop the maps of the dominions. So the idea of partition was way back in 1940, and it was the British which conveyed the two-nation theory to Jinnah, who declared it in 1940 at Minto Park in Lahore. So this whole idea that you are two different nations, the Muslims must have the separate state. The real reason was they wanted to create a friendly state, which is now Pakistan. So Pakistan is itself a British creation. Jinnah, who had actually worked for Hindu Muslim unity. He was called the ambassador of Hindu Muslim unity for the Lucknow Pact by Sarojini Naidu. Right till late 1930s, he was fighting for a united India. He had even dismissed the idea of Pakistan at the Roundtable Conference in UK, saying it's just a childish scheme, it will never work. When Rehmat Ali had talked about, used the word Pakistan for the first time. So he dismissed that idea. He had disowned the two nation theory in the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan. He was not a practicing Muslim himself. But for him, he used religion to satisfy his political ambitions.
Was he conscious about that?
I think he was. In fact, it's very interesting if you see the history of the Middle East. We see what's happening right now. The whole area, the whole place is in turmoil, and the war is going on. But if you go back into history, I've drawn the parallels between what the British did in the Middle East
Yeah.
with what they did on the subcontinent. So you had East India Company here, you had Levant Company there, you have Sharif Hussain, who was supposed to lead the Arab Revolt. Similarly, Jinnah was made the sole representative of Indian Muslims by the British. You had a situation where that pressure cooker environment which was created, Armenians were made to feel that they have to support, endorse their loyalty. The Indian Muslims till date have to say we are patriotic. There was detachment, there Kuwait, Palestine, here you had India, Pakistan. Even the exchange of population between Greece and Turkey under the League of Nations. Here it was under the very hastily cobbled Punjab boundary force, exchange of population between India and Pakistan, which led to 2 million being butchered and largest displacement in history, which Mountbatten incidentally said was it's only a fraction of the people of the population of the subcontinent. So he's treated it as basically he's gone on record to say it's actually a tribute to British powers, to the British power on the subcontinent. That it was because of us you didn't have massacres earlier. So that's the kind of thing that has gone on record. I've quoted him in the book, but the point is that the idea of partition was there much before 1947. It gained more and more prominence with the Quit India movement in 1942. All constitutional plans talked about a provincial option of parts of India having direct treaty relations with the British. The blueprint of partition was actually telegrammed by the Viceroy to the Secretary of State in the end of 1945. So that is virtually identical to the Ratcliffe Award.
Okay.
So which means Ratcliffe Award was a farce. It had already been predetermined. So we had all this, and then I've talked about direct action, being called by Jinnah from Bombay, killings which started in Calcutta, spread over the entire country. So by the time Mountbatten came to the subcontinent, the entire subcontinent was anyway in flames, with each cycle of violence making the previous one look very mild. So it was in that backdrop that you had this the partition, the constitutional plans, the cabinet mission plan, etc., which was all there, and the partition agreement, which talked about the partition of Bengal and Punjab. I've talked about the smoke screens created for Northwest Frontier Province, which was Congress ruled because Gandhi had supported the Khilafat movement. So had there been, and in Congress had won the elections there. Now, without Northern Frontier Province, Pakistan could not materialize. So, and that was the reason for partition. So, I've talked about smoke screens created by the British, which led to the Congress agreeing to a referendum to decide whether Northwest Frontier will go with India or Pakistan, and the Congress abstaining from that referendum to make Pakistan materialize. So the smoke screens created by the British, etc. I've documented all that. Now, in this entire scheme of things, the idea was that Jammu and Kashmir, which was contiguous to or adjacent to Pakistan, Muslim majority, would accede to Pakistan or be in a sphere of influence, and thereby giving whatever territory the British wanted, the Gilgit-Baltistan region, which completed the Islamic
Hmm.
crescent. The British would continue using that territory. They didn't need the entire state; they needed that territory.
Gilgit Baltistan. Yeah.
So the idea was that the scheme which eventually was reflected in the British statutes, the Indian Independence Act of 1947, and also the amended Government of India Act of 1935. Basically, it talked about partitioning these provinces, um, talked about princely states, and said that the British sovereignty, because if you recall in 1858, they said we don't want any more annexation, we just want the rulers to owe their allegiance to the British crown.
Hmm.
Internally, they're sovereign. Externally, they're dependent, the allegiances to the British crown. So that sovereignty would lapse. So then you would have about 560, theoretically speaking, sovereign countries on the subcontinent.
Right.
So the idea was that, so you had the law, the British statutes, which was accepted by India and Pakistan, that the ruler of the princely states would decide the future of the state,
Hmm.
regardless of the religious complexion of that state. So because the paramountcy went back, or the sovereignty went back to the ruler, he was sovereign in law. He could decide to go to India or Pakistan or stay independent. So that was the scheme. The book, of course, talks about how um, when Nehru said we don't want India to be even part of the British Commonwealth, and that would have affected British prestige. So how Mountbatten was sent to persuade India to be in the Commonwealth, and the promises that most of the states would come to India, because there was a speech given by Mountbatten in the Chamber of Princes to the princes, the rulers of the princely states, saying that you can be independent, but then you are interdependent with each other. There's common trade. You're to intersperse with each other to survive as sovereign countries. So the idea was that for external affairs, defense, communications, those areas give to the center, and rest of the areas rulers can see what they want to do. At that point, that was the terms of the instrument of accession. Eventually, of course, almost all the rulers executed the instrument of accession. They executed supplementary instruments, and then the merger agreements merging the territory into the Indian Union, as far as we are concerned. And then you have the State Reorganization Act, which redistributed that particular territory, and then we have the states the way we know it now. The three exceptions were Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir, Hyderabad, and Junagadh. Now, the book documents again the politics behind it. As far as Jammu and Kashmir is concerned, there was a Hindu Dogra ruler, Muslim majority state, and it was reverse for Junagadh and Hyderabad. Now, Jinnah had gone on record, Muslim League had gone on record to say, India is not ready for democracy. We want the British to stay here. So they could not talk about wishes of people. So the strategy was to get the Indian National Congress to lay down a policy that where the rulers of one community and the people are of another community, then the wishes of people will prevail, as opposed to the rule in the British statutes, which said the ruler will decide.
So this was Jinnah's.
So this was the strategy.
Right.
So it started with Junagadh.
And India, the Congress was hand twisted to make that policy.
So they fell in a trap, and they happily made that policy. They were not arm twisted.
Okay.
Because Junagadh has an importance in Hindu mythology. The ruler of Junagadh acceded to Pakistan, and then, of course, that it was Hindu majority, important for India. The ruler and the Diwan, etc., all sitting in Karachi, telegram the government of India to say that why don't you have a plebiscite to see the wishes of the people, to see whether they want to be with India or Pakistan.
Right.
And India said yes.
Okay.
So we had a plebiscite
Yeah.
in Junagadh, and then we told the world Junagadh is part of India. For Hyderabad, according to Pakistan, because these questions went to the United Nations, and there was the Junagadh question, the Hyderabad question. According to Pakistan, India marched its army into Hyderabad, took the Nizam into custody, held a plebiscite, and said Hyderabad is India, is part of India now. So Pakistan told the United Nations very well. It is the Indian National Congress's policy. Then, when the people are of one community, rulers of the other community, the wishes of people will prevail. We'll apply the same for Jammu Kashmir.
Right.
So the trap was to make India laid on this policy, act on this policy, so that they could draw parallels with Jammu and Kashmir.
Hmm. This was pre-partition, right?
This was post-partition.
This is post-partition.
Post-partition.
Okay.
So as far as Jammu Kashmir is concerned, Jammu Kashmir was acceded on 26 October 1947.
Right.
Partition was 15th August. Jammu and Kashmir was a sovereign country on 15th August
Yeah.
1947. So now what had happened was, when we come to Jammu and Kashmir, these instances were there of Junagadh, Hyderabad before that. As of 15th August 1947, Jammu and Kashmir had standstill agreements with India and Pakistan. The ruler wanted to be independent. He did not want to go to either Pakistan because he was Hindu. He didn't want to be in Islamic Pakistan. He did not want to come to India. He had got Nehru arrested in 1946 at Kohala. Sheikh Abdullah, who was talking about democracy and the way we had quit India, they had a movement against the ruler there in Kashmir, in J&K. So he was a popular leader. So the ruler and Sheikh Abdullah and Nehru were close to each other. So he felt that if he came to India, he would lose his power. So he did not want to come to India. He wanted to remain sovereign. I've documented that much before the October tribal invasion from Pakistan, there was anyway pressure, incursions were happening. There were pressure coming from Pakistan to make the ruler accede. Mountbatten went over to meet the ruler of Jammu and Kashmir, told him, why don't you go to Pakistan?
This is when he says, Hari Singh says to Mountbatten that I have Sheikh Abdullah who is pro-Nehru.
Yes, and basically what he said, Mountbatten told Hari Singh that why don't you go to Pakistan? And India will not object. And he was acting as the Governor General of India. So when he's doing all this. So anyway, he goes to Hari Singh, says, I don't want to go to either India or Pakistan. Then you had the tribal invasion, which actually helped the ruler Hari Singh make up his mind. So he reached out to India. I've documented how at a party Nehru was told about all this, and Nehru and Mountbatten had a conversation, and Mountbatten said, you can't give help to the ruler of Jammu and Kashmir till they formally accede. Though Mountbatten himself telegrammed his cousin, the King of England, to say, well, why can't India give help? India is sovereign. It's an independent country. Pakistan is independent. Jammu and Kashmir is independent. So if one independent country is asking for help from another independent country, it doesn't have to accede. But the idea was to buy time. Idea was to send men in to see what's the position, etc. And Mountbatten himself, I've documented, saying that we decided to send men in. And by the time men came back, I decided I know what I'm going to do. So he's gone on record to say that once the ruler has sent the instrument of accession, unconditionally acceding to India under the British statutes, Mountbatten says, I told Nehru that I, as Governor General of India, will not sign on this till you first commit to a plebiscite. This idea of plebiscite was introduced by by Mountbatten. And he said Nehru agreed, but said, can't we wait till the raiders are thrown out? And to that, Mountbatten said, I agreed. So the instrument of accession does not talk about any condition. It says that the ruler is acceding to India unconditionally in terms of this law, the British statutes, in the three areas: external affairs, defense, communications. He's retaining sovereignty for the rest of the subjects. And in law, you can have a sovereign give some powers to another sovereign and retain his sovereignty. There's nothing wrong. There are examples in common law all over the world. So that is perfectly legitimate. In fact, the instrument of accession was identical to the instrument of accessions executed by the other princely states. They had executed supplementary instruments, instrument merger. The Jammu and Kashmir never did that. But otherwise, the instrument of accession was the same. In a covering letter, Mountbatten says there's the wish of the government of India that once the raiders are thrown out, then we'll have a reference to the people. So it is India which accepted that accession provisionally.
India accepted it.
The ruler unconditionally acceded to India. It is India which accepted the accession provisionally and said that we will go to the people, make a reference once the raiders are thrown out.
But why was this done? I mean,
In
then
background of Junagadh, Hyderabad. And
Okay.
Mountbatten said that because the Indian National Congress had laid down that policy by that time.
right.
So that was a trap which was laid down for the purposes of Kashmir. Now, with that background, we accepted that accession provisionally, and it told the whole world when all India radios and cables to the UK, to Pakistan, that we're accepting the accession provisionally. We took that stand at that point of time. This was in 1947.
Okay.
Now, for the British, this would have been fatal for the Great Game. Because if Jammu and Kashmir becomes part of India, then there would be Indian control over Gilgit-Baltistan. So I've documented how 5 nights after the accession of Jammu and Kashmir to India, making Jammu and Kashmir an integral part of India, in my reading of the law, is Jammu and Kashmir became an integral part of India on 26 October 1947 and remains till date, the entire territory.
According to the British statute.
According to the British statutes and my reading of the law, which I'll elaborate in a bit, that Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part of India. Not only because I say so, the law which created India says so, the law which created Pakistan says so. So we'll come to that in a bit. But what the British did was, after this territory became Indian territory, 5 nights after that, the Gilgit Scouts, the British-led Gilgit Scouts, carved out the Gilgit-Baltistan region, hoisted Pakistani flag on what was Indian territory, and asked Peshawar, you take it over. So this was in violation of every conceivable principle of law. It's the British who carved out Gilgit region and gave it to Pakistan after it had become Indian territory. Now, at that time, we were still dominance of the British. Dominance means that the King of England was still the constitutional head. Indian army was headed by British officers. Pakistan's army chief was British.
Right.
The British realized that if India goes to war against Pakistan to recover Gilgit-Baltistan, it will liquidate Pakistan, defeating the very purpose of partition. So the British chief of staffs of the Indian and Pakistan army earmarked the so-called Azad Kashmir to be a buffer zone so that Indian army cannot attack Pakistan and recover Gilgit-Baltistan. So these two areas, Gilgit region and the so-called Azad Kashmir, were earmarked by the British in 1947, which were Indian territory, to be kept free from Indian control so that this territory could be used. Pakistan had de facto control, and then Pakistan could give this territory to the British. So I've documented all that from British documents, British archives, other exchanges, other scholars who have talked about how all this was done with the territory of Jammu and Kashmir way back in 1947.
But then this happened because the British trusted Muslims more than Hindus.
It's not a question so much of Muslims or Hindus. They want Muslim League had given its unconditional support to the British. Indian National Congress saying we want to leave the British Commonwealth. So they wanted a friendly, compliant, sovereign state created in this area, which would give that territory to the British for their defense and strategic purposes against Soviet Russia. So we had partition only because British wanted North-Eastern province and Gilgit-Baltistan.
So the whole partition was just because of
That
Gilgit
territory,
Baltistan.
what Churchill has said, keep a slice of India. Churchill said India is no more a country than the equator. You cut it into as many pieces as you want to. He didn't like India anyways. But he told the British political leaders and the strategists, keep a slice of India. That slice of India is what is now Pakistan. So we had this butchery of 2 million people. We have had this LOC, etc.
Yeah.
We have had creations of different borders, artificial borders, simply because British wanted that territory. And the Indian leadership of undivided India simply did not did not rise up to the challenge.
But then, I mean, I'm trying to make sense of what the Indian logic was behind everything that happened. Were our leaders blindsided, or they knew what is happening, but then the conditions were going against them?
Well, I think it's difficult to believe they did not know what the British policy is. In fact, Krishna Menon had wrote to Mountbatten that is it because of the Great Game that you're doing this whole thing of constitutional plans, etc. It's not that they didn't know, but what's the point of writing to the symbol of the British monarchy, the colonial power on India, to say that why are you having partition? Is this because of this reason? I mean, I think it was that our leaders were not politically mature. They were taking, I mean, it's very moralistic stand, which the people will prevail, etc. In today's environment, you can't really have. I mean, these are high principles. So we were led into, or I think our leaders were led more by that than the practicalities as to what is happening.
So is it fair to say Jinnah was a better politician?
I think he was a clever lawyer. Then he had a clear strategy. In fact, he was already wooing the Americans, whereas we were talking about non-alignment. So now this was the area, but going back to the instrument of accession, even if New Delhi had made this promise of reference to the people, it's made it to its own people. So it was within India's domestic jurisdiction. In international law, one country accedes to another country. A third state can't veto it. Jammu and Kashmir acceded to India, became part of India. Pakistan has no standing. So now the British had to do something to give Pakistan standing. And I've documented how the British, Mountbatten in particular, leaned on Nehru to say, let's involve the United Nations. And Nehru saying, why? You have tribal invaders coming in. It's not a state that has come in. United Nations has no jurisdiction. And I've documented from the minutes and from the meetings between the Pakistani Prime Minister, Nehru, Mountbatten, etc., how pressure was eventually laid upon Nehru to say, let's involve the United Nations and India will take a morally high ground by doing so, by not taking advantage of the position Jammu and Kashmir finds itself in, and so on and so forth. Now, the trap was to go to United Nations. The idea was that go to United Nations and stop fighting. You want peace at the end of the day. And Mountbatten even assured Nehru that the United Nations will find Pakistan to be the aggressor.
So Nehru originally didn't want to go to
He
the
did
UN.
not want to go to it. And he himself said that the United Nations had no jurisdiction.
Is this documented?
It's documented. I've documented in the book itself from the minutes of the meetings, etc. And he said that Nehru said, I'll take a sword and go on Kashmir and fight and throw the Pakistani. This is pure, simple aggression. Now, anyway, that difference was made, but the British trap was slightly different. And I've documented how the British went to New York to brief the Americans what stand to take, etc. The British strategy was very simple. At that point of time, there was a notion of provisional orders under the League of Nations, which was the precursor of United Nations, which basically said wherever there's fighting, have immediate ceasefire without requiring the aggressor to vacate. So you put the aggressor gets de facto control of the territory. The idea was that India would go to the United Nations complaining of aggression. United Nations would say immediate ceasefire without requiring Pakistan to vacate. And Pakistan would then get de facto control of Gilgit-Baltistan
Hmm.
and make it available to the British for the great game against Russia. And that's what happened. The United Nations Security Council would hold India to its commitment to referendum. Plebiscite was not the word used in the by Mountbatten when giving his letter to the ruler, Hari Singh. But it would be a referendum or plebiscite, but to ensure its neutrality under UN supervision. So and that's again was the UN resolutions. So we stand alone in history as being the only country in the world to have gone to the United Nations to complain about aggression on our territory and come back with a commitment that's first have a plebiscite under UN supervision to see whether it's even our territory.
Hmm.
And that's the reason why, in fact, I've recreated what happened in the United Nations Security Council with many countries saying that no power would ever agree to plebiscite if it was so sure that it is its own territory.
Hmm.
So the political immaturity, I would say, of New Delhi at that point of time. But this was the strategy we fell, the trap laid for India before the United Nations. We fell for it. And we have not been able to recover our territory till now, 2024. Both Azad Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan is Indian territory as per Indian constitution. It's not Pakistani territory as per Pakistan constitution. They are Indian citizens which reside there. These Indian citizens have lost their consciousness of being Indian citizens. It's not in the public discourse in India that a part of Indian citizens are till date in 2024 living under foreign rule. So that's because of a misconceived policy at that point of time. But it didn't stop here. We accepted the accession provisionally, then we internationalized it. We committed on the United Nations Security Council, floor of the United Nations Security Council, that we'll have a plebiscite, which incidentally I don't think was ever meant to happen. Because if you see the way the UN resolutions is framed, first Pakistan would vacate, and then you would have the plebiscite. If Pakistan never vacates, there's no question of plebiscite. Pakistan would never vacate because it wanted that territory. And so in May 1948, earlier tribal invaders had come with Pakistan officers in camouflaged as irregulars. In May 1948, Pakistan Army officially moved in. And it's recorded by the United Nations observers, etc. This violates international law. Pakistan was never meant to vacate. Plebiscite was never meant to happen. That's the way the UN Security Council resolution is structured, giving it in the handle to Pakistan to take the first step.
Right.
So our policymakers keep saying they didn't vacate, so there's no plebiscite. It's by design, in my view. The Pakistan chose not to vacate. It's not because they wanted the rest of the territory. That was the instructions. Keep that territory with you. Now, with this situation, Pakistan being in control of that territory, Nehru realized, the government of India realized that plebiscite is never going to happen. In fact, there's a secret telegram which he sent to Sheikh Abdullah in 1952, which I've documented, where he says that 4 years ago I had realized that plebiscite was not going to happen. That means he realized in 1948 itself. War is not an option. So perhaps the best way to do is let them keep what they have. We keep what we have.
This is what he said to
Sheikh Abdullah in 1952 in his letter. And that is territorial status quo. Let them keep what they have. We keep what we have. In 1957, last time when we had the major debates with the United Nations Security Council, it is New Delhi which said, let sleeping dogs lie. We believe it's our duty not to re-agitate matters. So we are disowning our territory and our people. So India's policy seems to be that the way to resolve the Kashmir issue is to disown our own territory, our own people. In 1965, we uh, got back Haji Pir in the 1965 war. In 1966, we handed back our territory to Pakistan. This is because of this policy of territorial status quo. Haji Pir and the territory our Jawans we fought for, we won in the 1965 war. We recovered it, part of Indian territory. We handed back Indian territory to Pakistan. I've documented cases about there's this lady who's being beaten by a husband on that side of the Jhelum, Pakistan occupied Kashmir. She falls in the river Jhelum, comes on this side. Indian citizen under the Indian constitution. Not a Pakistan citizen under the Pakistan constitution. Indian forces picks her up and gives her to Pakistan forces. Then you have the Shimla Agreement, where everybody says the unofficial solution was LOC into the international border. That is, we're disowning our territory. Officially, we have the parliament resolution which tells Pakistan, please vacate, give back our territory. But the consensus seems to be that the unofficial solution is LOC into the national border. In my view, even that policy is against our constitution.
How?
You see, we have decisions of the Supreme Court. Berubari Union's case is one, for instance, which says that it's an essential attribute of sovereignty to acquire territory, to give away territory. And so in that case, it was decided that Indian Parliament had the power to cede national territory by making law, amending the constitution, and saying that a preamble does not put a check, any limitation on the power of parliament. Then in 1973, you have a larger bench decision of Krishnanda Bharati's case, 13 judges of the Supreme Court, which has not been overruled, and nor is it likely to be overruled, which says that we are a controlled constitution. Parliament does not have unlimited powers. Parliament cannot amend the constitution to affect its basic structure or basic features. So in the guise of amendment, you can't amend a constitution out of existence or destroy its basic features. Territorial integrity and unity of the country has been held to be the basic feature by the Supreme Court.
Mm.
And the Supreme Court has said that the preamble puts a constitutional limitation on power of, is also puts constitutional limitation on power of parliament, and territorial integrity is there, unity of the country is there. If parliament has no power to amend the constitution to destroy or amend the territorial or impact the territorial integrity or the unity of the country, then how can it disown POK? So in my view, Parliament has no power to enter into any treaty with Pakistan or enter into any agreement with any country or agree before the United Nations to give away Indian territory. So our policy is against our own constitution.
Right.
And remains so till date. Because after Shimla, you had Lahore Declaration, reiterating it, that inviolability of the ceasefire line. We are in a situation that as of date, the former territory or the territory of the former princely state, now the union territories was after 370, etc. I mean, we'll come to 370 because that's a separate conversation altogether. You have about 45% of the territory with India. You have about 35 of the territory with China, with Pakistan, and you have about 20% of the territory with China, who has nothing to do with Kashmir. They say Sichin was part of China, we say it's part of Jammu and Kashmir. So you have a LSC. So on one side you have a LOC with Pakistan, you have a LSC with China, and there's a political stalemate. China has conceived this Belt and Road Initiative. And essential part of that is the CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. The CPEC starts from Gilgit-Baltistan, Indian territory, which gives China access to West Asia, Gwadar Post. So China has been investing billions of dollars in laying down tunnels, optic fibers, etc., disseminating Pakistan, Chinese culture, and so on and so forth through Indian territory. And our protests are low key because of territorial status quo. We're just making a formal protest. The only concession when India says we'll boycott your CPEC meeting is they'll say, well, we'll change the name of CPEC. Even that offer they withdrew one day later. So we have a situation where part of the territory of the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir is with Pakistan. Part of it is with China. That is more than 55% of the territory of the state is not under Indian control. It is Indian territory. Indian citizens living under foreign rule. And we in India are not doing anything about it apart from asking Pakistan and China vacate. We blank out China altogether because our parliament resolution tells Pakistan to vacate. We say it's a bilateral issue. Each time we say it's a bilateral issue, we are giving standing on Pakistan other than an aggressor. So if you think about it, we are the ones who created doubts on our own title on J&K by accepting the accession provisionally when the rule had come unconditionally. We are the ones who internationalized it. We are the ones who give standing on the international community to comment on Kashmir. We are the ones which facilitated the international community saying the entire territory is disputed territory. So outside India, the maps show the entire territory to be disputed territory when it's Indian territory. We are the ones, after having ensured that China and Pakistan keep 55% of their territory, with Pakistan actually gifting part of Indian territory to China in 1963. After doing all that, now we tell the United Nations you have nothing to do with the Kashmir issue. Now it's a bilateral issue, saying that at least Pakistan has the standing on Jammu and Kashmir when, according to me, it's only an aggressor. So this is where we stand today on Jammu and Kashmir. So if you say, why did we have this issue? We had this issue for, it was created by the British, perpetuated by the British for their own purposes. But we have let it become this way by having flawed policies right from 1947 onwards till date. The political discourse in this country, in India, has been, since its territorial status quo, we are anyway disowning that thing, has to be focusing on the territory which is with India, the 45%. And there we are creating the Kashmir issue with Article 370 and cross-border terrorism.
But then in the book, you have mentioned that Article 370 is neither the genesis of the Kashmir issue or is the solution located in it. So, what is this exactly?
You see, what is 370? I've talked about the ruler exceeding in three areas, saying, I'm retaining my sovereignty for the rest. Now, with the accession, J&K became an integral part of India. So the basis of J&K being an integral part of India is the instrument of accession. Now, India was going to be a democracy, a republic. You can't have a monarch in a princely state. So there had to be transition of power between the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir to its people. Not to India, but to its people or its constituent assembly, who would decide the constitutional relationship within the Constitution of India as part of Union of India. But what is going to be the constitutional relationship? Do they want to give all powers to the central government? Do they want to merge into the Union of India the way the other states have? Or do they want to retain the identity? That was left for the State Constituent Assembly, which was to be an elected body elected by the people of Jammu and Kashmir. 370 simply reflects this position that for instrument for areas given to New Delhi by the ruler, external affairs, defense, communication, ancillary matters, You just consult the state government, etc., and New Delhi has the power. For other matters which is yet to be given, you need the consent of the state. 370 contemplated that there will be a state constitutional assembly which will be set up, which will frame the constitution of the state.
Hmm.
But it's not a sovereign constitution, it's within the constitution of India. 370 is a provision of the Indian constitution.
Right.
So nobody's saying it's a sovereign constitution or it's outside the constitution of India. It's within India. The way you have special status in Northeast, you have in Himachal. Similarly, 370 does not even use the word special status.
Oh, okay.
It only says the state constitutional assembly will decide. So that when we talk about the basic the basic committee resolutions, um, they said that we are going to, the idea of the state constitutional assembly is to talk about setting up the constitutional relationship of the state within the Union of India. Now, when the Constitution 370 was introduced, um, there was still a monarchy. The state constitutional assembly was yet to be set up. The constitution of Jammu and Kashmir had yet to be framed. And that's why it was a transitional provision. It was a temporary provision. Not because it had to stay or go, but because these events had yet to happen. In 1950, there was a transition from the Hari Singh to Yuvraj. Then there were these notifications by the Yuvraj. Eventually, you had the State Constitutional Assembly, which was set up by the proclamation. And then that was an elected body. And then that framed, they passed a resolution saying that we, the people of Jammu and Kashmir, are an integral part of India. So the resolution is there on 1954. They decided to have the Delhi Agreement, which was passed by State Constitutional Assembly, passed by Indian Parliament, which gave special status in a way or preferential treatment to state subjects. You had the state constitution, which was contemplated by the Indian Constitution,
Right.
which was framed in 1956 with effect from 1957. And then the Constitutional Assembly dispersed without making a recommendation to do away with 370, because 370 said that the same Constitutional Assembly which frames or is set up can make a recommendation to the President of India.
Hmm.
And with that recommendation, the President of India can say 370 ceases to exist.
Okay.
So when there's no recommendation, then in my view, no organ of the Indian state has the power to make that recommendation or to have a presidential proclamation saying that 370 ceases to exist. But it doesn't make a difference because it is within the Union of India. It's not outside India's sovereignty. Now, 370 is only a mechanism to give effect to the instrument of accession. It has nothing to do with the Kashmir issue.
Can you elaborate on this?
By getting rid of 370, have we got back our people? Has Pakistan vacated? Has China vacated? Kashmir issue is there's a differing perception of what is the Kashmir issue. Kashmir issue is multi-layered. For Kashmiri Muslims, it's this right of plebiscite, self-determination, which is promised by New Delhi. For Kashmiri Pandits, it is being thrown out of their own homeland, being a refugee in their own country, the terrible atrocities which happened in 1990s. For Jammu and Ladakh, it is the hegemony of the valley, uneven equal development. For the Indian state, security forces, it's a law and order situation with Pakistan generously exporting terrorism. For the Indian state, we have a parliamentary resolution, Pakistan should vacate and there should be no cross-border terrorism. Everybody has a different take on what is the Kashmir issue.
Right.
According to me, these layers are important, but this is not the crux of the Kashmir issue. The crux of the Kashmir issue is to get rid of the disputed territory tag on the international plane, which we facilitated. We need to make the world agree that the entire territory is Indian territory, which it is.
But how do you do that? Because from what I've understood till now, there are several perspectives, and this was essentially a problem that India created for itself. So how do you resolve that?
So that is what the book is all about, to say that you don't have a diplomatic solution. If our own policy has been territorial status quo, we don't even expect the world powers to tell Pakistan and China to vacate.
Right.
We don't have a military solution. We are not, war is anyway not an option. Even if we had the capability of fighting against Pakistan and China on both fronts, we anyway, Shimla Agreement says we have ruled out war. We don't have economic solution because um, Pakistan can survive with the Western aid that it has been. It's the Western powers have been propping up Pakistan throughout. I mean, they're the ones who created Taliban. They're the ones who have created this whole international terrorism outfits. And they're the ones which have, each time when we tell, and they refuse to even accept that Pakistan was sponsoring terrorism till Kargil. So it's only, they just turn a blind eye, because, and they say now if you say Pakistan is a terrorist state, it will become like Afghanistan. So it's the Western powers which have created this entire mess. They're equally responsible for what has happened out there. So you don't have a economic solution. You don't have a political solution. There's a political stalemate between India, Pakistan, and China. So the book offers a way forward. The book says, and we'll put it very simplistically, India is an ancient civilization, but modern day India and Pakistan are creations of the British statutes. And that's the constitutional law governing India, governing Pakistan. We could have done away with it. We would say, well, the British to give us a law. But both India and Pakistan accepted it. So modern day India and Pakistan are creations of the British statutes. Now, as per these statutes, it was only the ruler who could decide the future of the state. Even for Junagadh, it was the ruler who said have a plebiscite. Nizam of Hyderabad eventually signed on the instrument on that, ratified in a way the plebiscite. So the legitimate authority put a stamp of approval, if nothing else. But it was only the ruler who could decide the future of the state. Then, if that is the position, then from where did New Delhi have the power? Where did the executive, government of India, have the power under the constitutional law that created modern day India to introduce wishes of the people to test or decide the future of a princely state? So if that wish of government of India, expressed by Mountbatten in 1947, is outside the constitutional law that created India, then India is not bound by it.
Right.
The same law created Pakistan. The ruler acceded to India under the same law that created India and Pakistan. Pakistan can't disown that law. If Pakistan disowns that law, there is no Pakistan. So the very law that created Pakistan makes J&K a part of India. So according to me, perhaps the way forward is to depoliticize the Kashmir issue
But how do you do that?
by testing the legal stance of both India and Pakistan on Kashmir. That's an ideal way of depoliticizing any issue, is to see the legal underpinnings. Now,
But then when the UN debates are happening, the one which recently happened, India takes like Kashmir, the issue of Kashmir for India is like once or twice in the whole debate. Whereas for Pakistan, it is beyond, like people are counting how many times do they take that name Kashmir. So it is 18, 20, whatever.
because India's policy is territorial status quo unofficially, Pakistan policies, we have got what we want more.
Okay. So how do you depoliticize that?
So, but you depoliticize that by testing the legal basis of India and Pakistan's case.
Hmm.
If we see that in law, you see, Kashmir is a political issue, but it also has certain legal elements to it.
Hmm.
It's a very peculiar situation in history where one constitutional law created two states. The same law created two states.
Right.
The British statutes is the constitutional law for Pakistan. It was the constitutional law for India. Both are creations of the same law.
Hmm.
If we see this, test the stand of India and Pakistan as per this constitutional law to see who has title to JNK, it will automatically depoliticize the Kashmir issue. It is as simple as this: that if I have a house and I create doubt about my own title to my house, I have the house, I have the title,
Hmm.
but I'm not too sure I have the title. Somebody gets in, I say, please get out. It's my house. They say, you don't know your own title. So I say, this is a terrorist movement. This is a freedom struggle.
Hmm.
Who will decide? Only a court of law who will confirm who has the title.
Right.
Now, in context of India and Pakistan and the international community, there has to be an authoritative pronouncement as to who has title to JNK under the law that created India and Pakistan.
Hmm.
The only body in existence is the International Court of Justice, whose views are authoritative, whose views are binding. So I had suggested way back in my doctoral thesis, which I gave in 2001, and I built on that even in this book, which came out in 2024, that it lies in India's interest to go to the ICJ and say, did not under the very law that create India and Pakistan, did not under that very law Jammu and Kashmir become an integral part of India? And if so, is not the very presence of China and Pakistan on the territory of Jammu and Kashmir, which is the Indian territory, does that not amount to aggression? Does not that invoke or bring into play international mechanisms laid down in judgments of the ICJ like Namibia, Nicaragua, which says the very presence of aggression and they must vacate, they must make reparations, they must vacate that territory? Does it not oblige the international community to ensure that Pakistan, China does that? So if you go to the ICJ, because if you think about it, what does, I mean, it is as simple as that, that it is our territory. Legally, we're entitled to it. Why aren't we going to the International Court of Justice and saying, please tell them to vacate?
Hmm.
Now, there are many who are going to say no, because even if the ICJ says it's Indian territory, China's not going to agree. Pakistan not going to agree.
And that's a fair argument.
So the two aspects of it. One is that law can't resolve anything. By a judicial decision, you can't resolve anything. But law has the potential to alter the political discourse. If there's a finding by the ICJ that the entire territory is Indian territory, nobody can tomorrow say there's a jihad going on there. You can make out a case before the Kashmiri population to say no injustice has happened to you by not having a plebiscite, because government of India had no power to offer plebiscite. You need to win people. Public opinion has more force than law. You need to be able to have the moral standard or morality to be able to stand for the people and say no injustice has happened to you. It's a feeling of injustice that makes people want to tear things down. So you need to be able to convince people, take people along with you. One way of molding public opinion is to alter the political discourse. And the political discourse can be by getting a finding
Hmm.
from the ICJ, regardless of enforceability, regardless of international politics. Get a finding to say, even because at the end of the day, who will implement a United ICJ decision? United Nations Security Council? China will veto it? Doesn't matter. A declaratory judgment itself has its own value. So you alter the political discourse to lay down, to be able to eventually start a political movement, break the political stalemate between India, Pakistan, and China. Think about it. China has never said, has take territorial ambitions on Gilgit-Baltistan. They say dispute is between India and Pakistan, or the issues, we say there's no dispute. We refuse to acknowledge there's a dispute. We say it's our territory. But even under the Pakistan and China, it's the Sino-Pakistan agreement, 1963, they say whenever this issue is resolved, we'll deal with that person.
Okay.
So what prevents resolution of this particular issue by getting a legal finding and then negotiating with China to say, you want to have BRI, do it under Indian sovereignty. We don't need to dismantle CPEC. We become part of it. Have economic stability. There are many possibilities. But first, at least, stake claim to what is yours.
Hmm.
So you need to stake claim to the entire territory, go to the ICJ, challenge the United Nations resolution. Think about it again. Jammu and Kashmir was a sovereign country, acceded to India. The instrument accession itself says that for the rest of the areas, I retain my sovereignty. Under what provision of the United Nations can the United Nations Security Council say that the future of this sovereign state, apart from what's given to India, will be decided by us under UN supervision in the absence of the sovereign ruler?
Hmm.
New Delhi had no competence to offer that. Sovereign rulers not for the United Nations. The rulers never said that my accession is based on violence or fraud. He says, I have unconditionally acceded to India. Who's the United Nations to say the future of the Jammu and Kashmir will be decided this way?
Right.
There's plenty of case law in international and international law judgments are there. We say that if a government is acted without jurisdiction beyond its own constitution, then it's not binding on that country. We are not bound by what New Delhi had said in 1947. So get a finding on that. Get a
But then,
finding on, and for those who say the law is not the best way of resolving international relations,
hmm,
what is the option? You
yeah,
don't have diplomatic, political, economic, military option. Has anybody suggested an option from 1947 till 2024
yeah,
of how you're going to get back POK? It's not going to get up and walk over. For those who criticize to say, well, law can't do anything, what is their option?
yeah.
And another criticism could be, what if ICJ goes against you?
Exactly. What if ICC goes against you?
What can they say? No, wishes of the people were relevant. Very well, we have the 1954 resolution which says, the Constitutional Assembly, which says we want to be part of India.
Hmm.
We've already ascertained the wishes. If the ICJ says that wishes of the people are relevant, it does not mean JNK becomes part of Pakistan.
Yeah. But then
We fall back on status quo.
the problem with that is like, if we go to ICJ and even if the ruling goes in our favor, what about the people? Because there are a lot of voices that they don't want to be part of India and of Pakistan as well. They want Azad Kashmir.
You see, but that is again because that case has been put forward before it. Is the Kashmiri population entitled to self-determination? It's a broader issue, not only on Kashmir or for anybody. There was no self-determination for the other princely states. The ruler decided. But hypothetically, let's test it. Now, the Constitution of India is a exercise of a democratic right. It's exercise of self-determination. So we have the Constitution of India, which is itself a product of self-determination. Once that Constitution is accepted, and Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part of India under that Constitution, then a section of Indian population do not have a further right of self-determination.
Hmm.
So long the constitution is there. If there's no constitution, like in many countries, you keep rewriting the constitution or replacing constitutions. Pakistan has replaced the constitutions. Each constitution is an exercise of self-determination. There it may be by military, so it's not self-determination. But suppose in any given country there's a referendum and there is a fresh constitution. There's that's an exercise of self-determination. Under United Nations resolutions itself, definition of self-determination itself, they say self-determination is applicable to those under colonial rule. They don't right of self-determination in theory or in practice or conceptually for people who are already living under a constitution which is an outcome of self-determination. So for those in Jammu and Kashmir who say we want self-determination, your constitution Jammu and Kashmir itself was exercise of self-determination. You can't have a further right of self-determination. So you need to be able to explain it to people. You see, the point is, nobody will understand a law they don't understand. Nobody will follow a law they don't understand. And law does not persuade because it threatens. That's not the way you handle conflict. You have to take people along with you. You have to explain to them the fallacy in the argument, the error in their understanding.
But then, how do you explain it to people where so much is happening. Okay, so, I mean, you take the national security issues, you take whatever is happening politically over there with the separatist leaders over there. How do you explain
Well,
to them?
when many countries have experimented, you had the reconciliation movement in South Africa, for instance. You see, it's not been a happy situation. There has been violence, and violence reinforces violence. State violence is no answer to terrorism. It will only create more terrorists. There's a cycle of trauma. If a person loses a loved one, they will take to violence. Our Indian forces, I mean, if you think about the kind of sacrifices the Indian army people have made, the people from villages, poor families, they're in the army to, apart from being patriotic and all that, but they're there to earn to provide livelihood to the families. They get martyred for no fault of theirs. They didn't create the Kashmir issue. They don't have a solution for it. We are just sacrificing lives.
Right.
This violence has to stop. The only way peace will come if we are able to depoliticize the Kashmir issue, to say that what are we fighting over? Whose territory it is, number one. And for me, I always feel that it's a broader issue. India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, all the people of the subcontinent are all one people. There's a subcontinental culture over thousands of years of, 1100 years, whatever years of Mughal rule. There's a fusion of Indo-Muslim culture.
Mm.
I mean, there are people which talk about Akhand Bharat and they talk about etc. I mean, I'm not that optimistic, but I feel that if borders cannot be redrawn, at least they can be made irrelevant. They can be made peaceful.
Mm.
The way of doing that is to put in public domain that the people of the entire subcontinent have been taken for a ride by the British and the colonial politics.
In fact, if I'm not wrong, Savarkar's idea of Hindustan, it was pretty similar to what you have quoted in the book about Syed Ahmad Khan. Even Savarkar said the people who have lived in India and who consider Hindustan to be their fatherland, and where their ancestors have lived, is a place where all Hindus live. And he's terming Hindus for Islamists, for Christians, for Buddhists, for everyone. And that was the same case with Syed Ahmad Khan.
I mean, that's even Gandhi has said, why two nations then? If you have Hindus, Muslims, you have Christians, you have Parsis, you have Sikhs, why not five nations?
Hmm. True.
You see, the point is that even now, when you do track to diplomacy, you talk to people, there's a lot of love and affection.
Yeah, absolutely.
You are, of course, I've talked in the book how history is being distorted, how um, generations are brought to demonize, generation in Pakistan are brought to demonize India, that demonize India as such. They don't even know their own roots about Gandhi. They don't know about the freedom movement, etc. India has been, many in India are conditioned to demonize Pakistan. One needs to put facts in the public domain in such a way to show to the people that you all are one people, even if you now want to live in different countries. You have your own. I mean, a lot of scholars have talked about the vested interest in perpetuating this kind of animosity or this LOC, LSC, and so on and so forth. But think about it. If there was no LOC or no LSC, think about how much money we would be saving, how many resources we would be saving, how fast we would become a superpower. If we are able to resolve the Kashmir issue and we are able to turn the pressure on China by threatening the CPEC, they'll be much more flexible on the other front
Right.
in the Northeast. The gains of trying to resolve this for once and all. That's why I said 370 is not the genesis of the Kashmir issue. Solution is not located in 370. By getting rid of 370, you not got rid of the Kashmir issue. Our approach is to protect what we have, integrate that more and more into the mainstream, which is perfectly okay. Notice saying don't do it. But that's not going to resolve the Kashmir issue.
But then, even if you try to resolve the issue, you go to ICJ, ICJ rules in your favor, and you depoliticize the whole issue. You explain to people what was wrong and what is the truth about everything. How do you stop the export of terrorism from Pakistan? Because that will still continue, right?
You see, because there's a genuine belief in Pakistan that India has cheated Pakistan of Junagadh and Hyderabad.
But then they have come so far. We have come so far. How do you stop that now?
Because 75 years in a country's history is not much when we talk about India being a civilization of thousands of years.
Hmm.
I mean, right from Sindh to the Harappan, Mohenjo-daro, etc., it's all India.
True.
If you're talking about India's civilization goes into so many centuries. What is 75 years? But you need, but the sense which I get, and even if you see it from that point of view, I've got the sense I get, I'm talking about from what I've read. I mean, I have nothing to do with Kashmir as such. For me, it's an academic exercise. It's part of my doctoral research. But when I see the United Nations Security Council reports, when I see the writings, from that I can sense that there's a genuine belief in Pakistan that India has taken Junagadh by saying plebiscite. India has taken Hyderabad by saying plebiscite. But when it comes to Jammu and Kashmir,
Yeah.
no plebiscite. Though my view is plebiscite was never meant to happen. That was, even the Pakistani population has been taken for a ride by the British.
Hmm.
But but if there's a genuine belief and these facts are put in domain that we are all um, very small players in the wider geopolitical game which is being played out on the subcontinent, then perhaps there can be reconciliation. So the idea is the reason behind writing this book was to say that we cannot live in perpetuity with the Kashmir issue. It's perhaps one of the longest outstanding issue. It's no good simply by saying, well, we focus on what we have, maintain law and order, keep painting Pakistan to be the villain by saying you're indulging cross-border terrorism, and gloating over the fact that we are developing as a superpower and that our neighbors are disintegrating, or they are at least there's chaos everywhere. That's not the narrative to have a peaceful subcontinent.
Hmm.
So it's a broader issue that we need to. I mean, for the Holocaust, you have memorials. Partition was perhaps the most painful incident in human history. What's the collective memory of it? I've cited Manto, I've cited, I mean, even Gandhi, who says I was spiritually defeated. I mean, he said, like, it's like about partition, like cutting a living organism into pieces because you have Hindu Muslims coexisting side by side in every village.
True.
So it's like cutting a living body into pieces. So that trauma, the way our psyches have been affected, whether in Pakistan, whether in India, whether in Bangladesh, the psyche of the Indian people have been affected. People on the subcontinent has been affected. That needs to be addressed.
Right. But then, this is something which I've always wanted to understand. If the genesis of this problem between India and Pakistan, between India and Bangladesh, between India and China as well, up to some extent, is a British problem. And all of the problems in the world that are happening today, all the wars, they are happening because the British drew broader borders weirdly and in a haste. Why don't we or the world goes against Britain, and why don't we go to ICJ against them?
No, you see, the thing is that that's a different kind of where you are talking about reparations. Talk has, I mean, Mama for the Mama uprising, the British was sued. Um, I mean, you see, the thing is that our policy has been rightly or wrongly, I don't know, to say that it is those in power in the UK at that point of time who were ruthless, the East India Company, etc. And then whether it's Clive or Hastings, etc. But of course, with the indulgent nod of the British leaderships and the crown, etc. So they got blood on the hands. So that is the thing. But then the British population themselves were victimized by their own rulers. So it is that was a different stage of human history, where you started having explorations right from the Portuguese and then the French, Dutch, and so that was a colonial age kind of thing. So we don't live in the past. There has been arguments to say we need to get back our. I mean, if you go to the Windsor Castle or you go to any of the museums, you'll see the Tipu Sultan sword and things like that. I mean, it makes the blood boil to think about Indian possessions still there. So all that is very well. So you can ask for reparations, you can hold them accountable. And in fact, when I had been asked to give evidence before the Foreign Affairs Committee in the UK Parliament, in the House of Commons, my evidence is there that Britain has no moral standing to talk about human rights, to talk about how to talk about the kind of lectures which it gives, given its own track record on what it has done across the world. So, and many of the British leaders, whether it's Churchill, etc., would be on the same pedestal as the people who are normally despised, like Hitler, etc., for the
Mm.
kind of Bengal famines, the millions that were killed painfully
Yeah.
by deliberate British policy. So all that is there. These are historical facts that cannot go away. But my purpose of going into history is to see whether we can correct our errors to find a way forward, as opposed to collectively trying to say that that was a horrible, terrible race that's caused so much misery all over the
Yeah.
world. Even in the Middle East, whatever's happening, whether it's, I mean, I've talked about the Triple Cross by the
Mm.
British when it came to Palestine, etc.
Yeah.
How the reason, the strife in the Middle East is because of the British and their mandate system, etc. So the whole world knows it. But the purpose of going into the history is not to live in the past.
Mm.
Purpose of going into history to say, if this is why it happened and this is how it happened, then this is the way forward.
Right.
Because we have to move on in life. We have to be able to find ways of bringing peace on the subcontinent.
Yeah.
So that is with that intention that one goes into the past,
Mm.
not so much from the point of view of raking old wounds. And this has a practical connotation. Even today, you have riots in the UK.
Mm.
Polarization is happening in the UK.
Yeah.
It is in the interest of the Western countries. What prevents Britain or the UK, for instance, from honoring its own law, the Government of India Act and the Government of the Indian Independence Act, to come categorically out and say the entire territory of Jammu and Kashmir is Indian territory and Pakistan, China should not be there? The British government is bound by the British law. It was their law. That will change the political discourse. So there are many ways of handling the political discourse. I have suggested that as the first step, use law to break the political stalemate, to depoliticize the Kashmir issue, so that to generate some political movement to eventually resolve this issue, because law by itself can't do anything, but law has the potential of altering the political discourse.
But then, isn't this more of a, for India especially, more of a democratic problem, because no political party would want to do what you have said? Because then again, there's this chance, slight chance, that if the ruling goes against India, you might lose popular vote.
It is a political decision. There's no two things about it. And so whichever government of the day wants to take it up, which I suggest, eventually they may have to, because there's no other option. But whichever government does want to take it up, they will be taking the political risk. There's no doubt about it. Not because we lose anything. Like I said, if we win, 90% of the Kashmir issue is over.
Hmm.
When we say we lose, we don't really lose anything. If the ICJ simply says no, plebiscite was promised and that was the right way. Though even the United Nations Security Council studies, etc., many scholars have said that and even the United States have gone on record to say that the plebiscite option has now been outgrown. too many things have happened. There've been change of circumstances. Even that time, Pakistan joined CENTO, Baghdad Pact, etc. Pakistan has not vacated, so plebiscite is no longer an option because of what Pakistan has done itself. So we have many defenses. But even if they say wishes of the people should be kept in mind, we say we've already certain the wishes of the people. So we don't lose anything. By going to the ICJ, I don't think there's a win-lose situation. It's going to be either winning everything or status quo. So there's no real political risk involved from that point of view. But think about it, if we win, it alters the entire landscape.
Mm. Yeah, yeah.
So why not give it a try? What do we stand to lose?
Mm. Okay. Interesting. I think this has been one of the most educative podcasts, if I have to say that. And in fact, the book. Uh, so, for those people who are watching this podcast and who have got to know about the book from this podcast, let me first say I have read tons of books on Kashmir, and this is by far the most well researched book.
Thank you.
And so I told you just before we started rolling that I was reading Sarila's book, and that was bit too much for me to grasp all the information. But then you have made his book as well very easy for me to understand through this book. And in fact, you don't just talk about what is the past and present; you also talk about the future, as we have discussed in the podcast. So thank you so much, Amanji, for this conversation.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, same here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.